Since at least 2015, the legislature has promised property tax relief, but little has changed. Property taxes keep going up and we keep spending more. SB 9, the current property tax relief proposal in the Senate, doesn't solve the problem. It merely tweaks it. As long as we rely on property taxes, Texans will never truly own their homes or land or any other property. They've got to find a way to do this. Hello, welcome to this week's economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me again today. It's really a pleasure to have you with me. As you can see, if you're watching this on YouTube, I have a new background. I'm trying some new things. Isn't quite where I want it just yet, but hopefully it's heading in a good direction. Also using a little bit different mic today, so hopefully that also sounds good to you. Always trying to bring more and better things to you, the viewer. Thank you so much for subscribing, for sharing this, and going to vanceginn.substack.com to subscribe to my newsletter so you'll get these directly in your inbox when they come out. Or go to Apple Podcasts or wherever else you get your podcast. It really is a pleasure for you to listen to this each and every week. So thank you. All right, so let's get right into it, though. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's get to it. Like a quick overview, though, is President Trump's recent visit to the Federal Reserve was more than symbolic. It was a direct challenge at a time when Americans are grappling with rising grocery bills, housing costs, and debt payments. The Fed is spending up to $3.1 billion to renovate its D.C. headquarters, and they're running operating losses of more than $200 billion just over the last couple of years. So Trump's question, what's going on at the Fed, is one more people are starting to ask, and rightfully so. So how do we actually spur growth? It's encouraging to see the administration tackling that question, but some of the answers, like new tariffs, risk doing more harm than good by raising costs on American consumers and businesses. In this week's edition, we'll dive into the latest trade developments, GDP and jobs reports, Texas' special legislative session, and new Trump AI action plan, and much more. And so let's get right to it. There's a lot of things going on, so I don't want to waste your time. I know you're busy and productive like I am, so let's get to it. Number one, economic health. In the news, while visiting the Federal Reserve, former President Trump publicly pressured Fed Chair Jerome Powell to cut interest rates. Despite the political pressure, the Federal Open Market Committee, the FOMC, chose last Wednesday to keep its federal funds interest rate target, which is the overnight lending rate between banks, unchanged in the range of 4.25 to 4.5%. This is counter to what President Trump and some other economists were calling for them to cut their interest rate, okay? The latest gross domestic product report for the second quarter showed that real GDP grew at a 3% annualized pace, but is that reality? I'll let you know. And the U.S. jobs report noted substantial door down in the jobs market with just 73,000 net non-farm jobs added in July. So that's a weak number overall. My take on this is the Fed made the right call by holding its target rate unchanged. Inflation remains elevated, well above their 2% inflation rate target. And the Fed's bloated $6.7 trillion balance sheet, swollen by years of money printing and deficit monetization, continues to distort markets. This balance sheet is a central planning tool that disrupts real capital allocation, encourages speculation, and punishes savers. While these effects may not always show up clearly in inflation data, they surface in deeper dysfunctions, declining productivity, unaffordable housing, bank fragility, and growing sense among Americans that the economic game is rigged against them. So the recent GDP report isn't the victory it's been made out to be by some. Much of the gain came from trade distortions, not underlying strength. Real private demand, which is a better measure of the economic or the real economy, don't just look at the service level, really look underneath that, and it wipes out some of the imports, because remember, imports are just excluded from GDP to not double count those purchases in consumption or investment. So really, GDP is an accounting identity, not really telling us as much about the economy. So we try to look at trends and what's going on and look at the private sector of the economy, and that grew just 1.2%. And you have the Fed's 2% target. That's the inflation is still well above that. And so there's no indication that the Fed should be cutting interest rates at this time. And then when you look at the weak jobs report for July, shows that the labor market too reflects policy-induced volatility, not sustainable growth. What we're seeing isn't a boom, it's a bounce on a roller coaster shaped by erratic tariffs, aggressive monetary policy, weak private investment, and policy uncertainty. If the U.S. wants sustainable long-term growth, it must stop using the Fed to mask chronic fiscal irresponsibility of overspending. The real issue is that lawmakers won't cut spending. If we want real lasting prosperity, we need a rules-based framework across the board, strict limits on federal spending growth, firm caps on monetary expansion, and real checks on the regulatory state's power to impose hidden cost on everyday Americans. Related to this, I go into depth on the GDP report in my new Substack post called U.S. GDP, Trump Tariff Whiplash and Growth Illusion. I also have one on the labor market that you can check out at vanceginn.substack.com. All right, number 2. Tariffs and trade deals in the news. The U.S. has reached trade agreements with the European Union and Japan, narrowly avoiding major trade disputes with key allies. Under the deals, most European goods entering the United States will face a 15% tariffs, while tariffs on Japanese vehicle imports will be reduced to 15%. Markets responded positively with Dow and S&P 500 futures rising 0.3% and NASDAQ futures up 0.4% after that news. Of course, some of those gains were taken away, though, from the weak jobs report that we had on Friday. So, despite the headlines, this is my take here, these aren't true trade deals. They're merely tariff adjustments rebranded as diplomacy. In fact, they're not really even a final deal. They're frameworks for a deal. We haven't seen what's actually going to happen at the end of the day because nothing is being written down. It's just what's being reported by President Trump through X, really, or Truth Social and other social media outlets. So instead of reducing trade barriers, the U.S. has doubled down on protectionism. Trump's tariffs are one of the largest tax increases on Americans in history, and these new rates will continue to increase cost. The so-called reciprocal tariff structure leaves Americans paying more, not less. A better path forward, America needs genuine free trade, guided by principles of liberty, stability, and prosperity. These should be a platform to unleash markets. That means taking credible first steps to restore fiscal discipline, reduce tax burdens, lift regulatory constraints, and build long-term policy stability to earn global trust. I explore these so-called trade deals that will hike prices on Americans in my recent Substack post titled Trump's Trade Deals Are Tax Hikes on Americans and the Damage Goes Deep. Don't miss that one. Number 3, Texas special session. Governor Abbott called a special session of the Texas legislature to address major issues like banning taxpayer-funded lobbying, providing property tax relief, and imposing local spending limits, things that I've been talking about for years. Yet on the very first day, the Texas House convened for just 4 minutes before adjourning, and it's been about that every day since they've been in session, in the special session. Among the bills on the table, at least in the Senate, have been Senate Bill 9, which is the property tax relief bill, and Senate Bill 5, a proposed ban on hemp-derived products, including THC. My take is that Texans deserve real property tax relief and ultimately property tax elimination. Since at least 2015, the legislature has promised property tax relief, but little has changed. Property taxes keep going up and we keep spending more. SB 9, the current property tax relief proposal in the Senate, doesn't solve the problem. It merely tweaks it. It allows local governments to raise property taxes by 2.5% annually instead of the current 3.5%, which means property tax can still double every 28 years instead of 21 years. That's not meaningful reform. That's surrender. As long as we rely on property taxes, Texans will never truly own their homes or land or any other property. They've got to find a way to do this. You do it by limiting spending at the state level, using surplus money to buy down school district property taxes, which is the majority of the property taxes in Texas and in most states. You get those to zero as quickly as possible. And then you have local governments also limit their spending to population inflation or something lower than that, and using their own surpluses to buy down their own property tax rates. I really think we should get rid of homestead exemptions, all the other stuff that picks winners and losers, because of what that does is artificially force property tax rates to be higher than they otherwise would, meaning that we have longer to go to get them to zero, which is really where they need to be. And also, look, prohibition doesn't work. SB 5, which is trying to ban hemp and ban THC, is misguided. Just like prohibition of alcohol a century ago was wrong-headed and the black market increased substantially. We remember all the Capone and all the other things that were going on. It's a terrible situation. We need to stop this because at the end of the day, this is a prohibition by another name. It's calling it regulation, but it's really prohibiting a lot of these things that many Americans, many Texans, as in Texas, really want. The polls are showing that a majority of Americans do not want a ban, do not want this, and Texans don't either. So let's not do this here in Texas. Instead, we should be thinking about better approaches. Supporters claim it's about safety, but banning legal access doesn't make people safer. It just pushes consumers to the black market, online sources, or across state lines, where there are no quality controls if that's what they really want. True safety comes from regulated open markets. Texans deserve the freedom to choose responsibly. Texas has the potential to be the first state to eliminate property taxes completely. Other states are catching on. If we want to lead again, we need bold vision, clear principles, and an unwavering commitment to liberty. Let's stop managing decline and start building a future of real prosperity. Check out my deep dive on Senate Bill 5. Should Texas ban THC or let markets and people decide? I also have a nice post over there about Senate Bill 9, which is not giving us the property tax relief that we so desperately need. Number 4, Trump's AI action plan in the news. The Trump administration recently unveiled its AI action plan, a package of initiatives and policy recommendations aimed at cementing the United States' position as a global leader in artificial intelligence, which is just advanced computing. The plan is organized around 3 core pillars: innovation, infrastructure, and diplomacy and security. And the federal government is already putting AI to work. The Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, was with Elon Musk, is deploying a new artificial intelligence tool called the DOGE AI Deregulation Decision Tool to streamline the regulatory code. The goal? Eliminate half of all federal regulations by the end of President Trump's first year in office. That would be huge. This is good policy in action. President Trump's AI action plan is a significant course correction from the Biden years that scraps top-down federal control and embraces innovation through deregulation, investment, and infrastructure. It's one of the most pro-market approaches to AI policies we've seen from any Western government. There is a gap, though. However, while the plan's vision is mostly correct, it lacks a crucial protection, a federal moratorium on state-level AI regulation. That omission was also left out of the Senate version of the One Big Beautiful Bill because the House had it in there, but it's also left out of this executive order by President Trump. So it leaves the door wide open for 50 different states to suffocate innovation under 50 different bureaucratic regimes. Now is not the time for a patchwork of reactionary mandates. Let's stop the regulatory land grab and ensure that AI's future is shaped by innovators, not stifled by politics. I talked a lot about this in a recent piece at American Institute for Economic Research that you should also go check out the show notes page. DOGE's use of AI to slash bureaucratic red tape is a great example of this technology being used for public good, reviving the administration's earlier deregulatory agenda that aims to eliminate around 100,000 federal rules. That would be amazing, potentially saving taxpayers trillions of dollars in compliance costs and contributing to a leaner, more efficient federal government. So don't miss this and more in the daily economy piece that I have on Trump's AI action plan over at American Institute for Economic Research. Number 5, state taxes and spending. In the news, Ohio recently adopted a 2.75% flat income tax, making it the 15th state with a flat income tax rate above 0. Remember, there are 8 states without a personal income tax. It joins states like Iowa and North Dakota, which passed income tax phase-outs during this year's legislative sessions. Meanwhile, other states like Washington are moving in the opposite direction by raising income taxes. My take on this is that we should be lowering income taxes. Nearly half the U.S. states now have either a flat or zero income tax or will soon. Getting to a flat or zero income tax paired with sustainable budgeting, that's the key part here, will be a top priority and should be across all states. States pursuing this approach will be far more competitive than those choosing to raise taxes like Washington. Interstate competition is a cornerstone of federalism and a driver of economic volatility, or vitality, I should say. So we need to also fix the property tax problem. Another area ready for tax reform is property taxes. This session, lawmakers are out on providing Texans with property tax relief, a burden that is a direct result of excessive local government spending. Instead of holding the line, many localities set tax rates to collect more revenue that feed their overspending habits. Real reform requires strict local spending limits to ultimately phase out property taxes in Texas and in all other states. So sustainable budgeting at the state level and the local level and the federal level are essential for long-term economic health. It requires discipline, fiscal planning, annual performance evaluations, audits, strategic use of surpluses, priority-based budgeting, and using those surpluses to reduce tax burdens. States should also conduct regular efficiency audits that are external to increase transparency, ensure accountability, and cut wasteful spending. This approach not only protects taxpayers, but strengthens economic resilience overall. Watch my latest episode of This Week's Economy on sustainable budgeting and delivering tax relief to hardworking Americans in the show notes page. Thank you again for joining me in this episode of This Week's Economy. For more insights, visit vanceginn.com and get even greater value with a paid subscription to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. Until next time, God bless you, let people prosper, and have a wonderful week. Thank you.